They smirked when I entered the room. I could feel it. The little glances, the whispers that carried my name like it was a stain on the family's reputation. "He's just the help," someone muttered near the window. Maybe they thought I wouldn't hear. But in that house, every word echoed. It always had. I hadn't been inside my Aunt Eleanor's mansion in Savannah since the funeral. The place smelled of polished wood and lilacs, her scent still lingering even in death. I used to trim the hedges out front, paint the shutters when storms chipped the color away. That's who I was to them, the boy who fixed things. Never mind that Eleanor used to call me her steady hands. My name is Samuel Grant, and today I was just here to listen. That's what Aunt Eleanor had asked me to do in her final letter. Be there, Samuel. Sit quietly. Let them show who they are. So I did. Harold was the first to notice me. He looked up from his phone, leaned back in his chair, and smiled the way a man smiles at a waiter who's taken too long. "Didn't know they let the staff in," he said. The others laughed softly, polite enough to pretend it was just a joke. I nearly turned around right there. The front door was only a few steps away, and the cold November air outside would have been kinder than what filled that room. But I could still hear Eleanor's voice in my head. "Stay steady, Samuel. Quiet strength wins in the end." So I stayed. Linda Moore, the attorney, stood near the fireplace, organizing a stack of documents that looked older than some of the people in that room. She wasn't part of the family, but she knew more about them than most. Her voice carried calm authority. "If everyone could take a seat," she said, "we'll begin shortly." The cousins shuffled around, claiming spots like vultures around a feast. I found an empty chair in the corner, a little away from the light. That's where I'd always been, in the corners, unnoticed, except for the one woman who'd ever seen me. As Linda began, the rhythm of her voice filled the silence. "This will, written and signed by Eleanor Whitmore, details the distribution of her estate as follows." The list was long. Properties, accounts, jewelry, and stocks I never knew existed. With every page, the cousins leaned forward like gamblers waiting for their turn. Harold crossed his legs and smiled, mouthing the numbers as they came. "That's mine, and that too." His arrogance was almost artful. At one point, Linda paused to take a sip of water. Harold chuckled. "Need a break already?" he said, glancing toward me. "Don't worry, Sam here can fetch you another glass. He's good at that sort of thing." The laughter rippled again. I felt my face grow warm, but I said nothing. Linda looked up then, her calm expression tightening just a little. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice firm, "you will refrain from disrespecting others in this room, or we can pause the reading entirely." For the first time, Harold's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He waved a hand dismissively. Of course, just having a bit of fun. But I saw something shift in Linda's eyes. She wasn't here just to read words on paper. She was here to honor a promise. And from the way she looked at me, I could tell she knew more than she was letting on. Outside, thunder rolled across the Savannah sky. Inside, the air grew heavier. The will had only begun, and yet it already felt like Judgment Day. The rain had started to tap against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the space between Linda's sentences. She read carefully, her tone professional but soft, as if she understood that every word she spoke carried weight. Across from me, Harold leaned back in his chair with that same confident smirk plastered on his face. He had always been the center of every room he entered, handsome in a polished, hollow way. His suit looked expensive, his watch gleamed under the chandelier, and his voice dripped with entitlement. "Let's skip the boring parts," he said loudly, interrupting Linda mid-sentence. "We all know Aunt Eleanor left something nice for each of us. Probably a little less for some, of course." His eyes slid toward me, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. The others chuckled, eager to stay on his side. I sat still. I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles people more than anger. Linda lowered her papers. "Mr. Grant, this is a legal proceeding. I suggest we maintain respect for your aunt's final wishes." He grinned. "Relax, Miss Moore. I'm sure even Aunt Eleanor would have appreciated a good joke." Something flickered across her face then, an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or disappointment. She turned back to the document. "The estate," she continued, "is to be divided among immediate family as follows." Each name she read was followed by a gasp, a sigh, or a greedy whisper. Every parcel of land and sum of money became a measure of worth in that room. Harold's sister clutched her pearls when she heard her share, and one cousin even dabbed tears of gratitude, though I doubted it had much to do with love. When Linda mentioned my name, a small sum given to Samuel Grant for his years of service to the household, Harold burst out laughing. "There it is! Knew it! The help gets a tip. Generous of her, wasn't it?" The laughter spread like wildfire, even among those who probably didn't find it funny. It was safer to laugh with Harold than to risk his disdain. Linda's voice sharpened. "If you are quite finished." But Harold wasn't. "Come on, Miss Moore. You can't tell me you don't see it. Aunt Ellie always had a soft spot for her charity cases." That one hit deeper than I expected. For a second, I almost spoke up. I wanted to tell him about the afternoons Eleanor spent in the garden, sitting beside me, talking about kindness as if it were a kind of wealth no one could steal. But then I remembered her letter. Let them show who they are. So I bit my tongue and let the silence return. Linda resumed reading, her voice steady but colder now. Every few lines Harold made a little sound, a sigh, a snort, a whisper to his sister. He was pushing boundaries on purpose, daring her to react. When she reached the final pages, her tone shifted slightly. "There remains," she said, "one handwritten clause, sealed separately per Eleanor Whitmore's request." The room stirred. Harold leaned forward. "A clause? What kind of clause?" She met his eyes. "The one she wrote herself, the night before she passed." A strange tension filled the air. Even Harold stopped smirking for a moment. Then he laughed again, though it sounded more forced this time. "Oh, come on. My aunt was barely lucid in those last days. We can't seriously—" Linda's gaze hardened. "Mr. Grant, this document carries a notarized seal from the state. I will read it as instructed." He spread his hands, still smiling. "By all means, let's hear what the old woman scribbled." But his voice trembled slightly. He didn't realize it yet, but the storm outside wasn't the only one coming. By the time Linda turned the final typed page, the rain outside had become a steady drumbeat. The old windows shuddered softly with every gust. Savannah storms had a way of sneaking up on you. Beautiful one minute, punishing the next. It felt fitting somehow. The cousins were restless now, the thrill of the reading fading into impatience. They'd already begun whispering to each other, dividing the estate in their minds before the ink was even dry. "I'll take the Charleston property," one said. "You can have it," another replied. "I'm going for the stocks. Easier to liquidate." It was like watching a pack of hounds tear apart a meal that wasn't yet served. Harold sat back, his chair creaking. He had that lazy smile again, the one that said he thought the game was already won. Every now and then he glanced at Linda, clearly waiting for her to trip over some legal technicality he could exploit later. I stayed quiet in my corner. I could feel Eleanor's portrait watching from above the fireplace, her eyes painted soft, yet knowing. When I was a boy, she used to say, "The measure of a man is how he behaves when no one's clapping." I thought about that as Harold bragged about buying a new car with his inheritance. Linda folded the last sheet and placed it neatly on the table. "That concludes the formal reading," she said. A wave of chatter erupted. Some cousins stood, some hugged, others began comparing what they'd received. Harold was already typing something into his phone, probably a message to his broker. And yet, Linda didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the sealed envelope beside her. "There remains," she said, "one final instruction from Mrs. Whitmore." The words cut through the noise like a knife. The room quieted, slowly, almost unwillingly. Harold frowned. "Another instruction? You already read the will." "Yes," Linda replied, "but this wasn't part of the formal draft. This was written by Mrs. Whitmore herself, in her own hand, and signed before witnesses." Harold laughed under his breath. "Oh, one of her sentimental letters, no doubt. Probably a goodbye message or a family blessing." No one else laughed this time. Something in Linda's tone told us this wasn't sentiment, it was law. She unsealed the envelope carefully, breaking the wax stamp with her thumb. The sound was small, but final, like a closing door. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges, her handwriting neat and steady. Harold shifted in his chair. "Is that even admissible? You can't just—" Linda raised her eyes. "It's admissible and binding." He rolled his eyes but didn't interrupt again. Linda began to read, her voice low but clear. "To those I leave behind, family by blood, though not always by heart, I wish peace, though I suspect you will first taste bitterness." The room stiffened. No one moved. Harold's jaw tensed. Linda continued, "You will hear many numbers today, and names you expect, but remember this. Value is not measured by inheritance, nor loyalty by attendance. The one among you who was most dismissed, most mocked, most faithful, shall receive what you never cherished, my trust." The cousins exchanged uneasy looks. I felt the room turning, like the slow tightening of a knot. Linda stopped reading, eyes flicking toward me briefly before lowering again. She hadn't finished, but the silence was thick enough to choke on. Harold let out a short laugh. "Well, that's poetic. My aunt always did love her riddles. Go on then. What's next?" Linda looked down at the page once more, her fingers trembling slightly. "There's more," she said quietly. I watched as she steadied herself. Her professionalism had cracked just a little, and that alone told me whatever came next would change everything. Outside, lightning flashed across the magnolia trees, illuminating Eleanor's portrait for just a second. Her eyes seemed almost alive in that brief light. And just like that, I realized this wasn't over. This was the beginning. The storm outside had grown heavier. Rain lashed against the tall windows, streaking the glass with silver lines that blurred the garden beyond. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and steady, as if the sky itself was waiting for what came next. Linda's hand hovered over the page. The paper shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what it held. The cousins sat frozen, uncertain whether to laugh or listen. Finally, Harold broke the silence. "All right," he said, leaning forward. "Enough theatrics. Read it." Linda looked up at him, calm but unyielding. "I will, but I'll ask that everyone here remain silent until I'm finished." Harold gave a mock salute. "Of course, counselor. You have the floor." He turned to the others, smirking, as if the moment belonged to him. That was Harold's way, always assuming the spotlight, even in rooms where he was least wanted. Linda took a breath. "This clause," she said, "was written entirely in Mrs. Whitmore's handwriting. It overrides any previous allocation if conditions described within are met." A murmur rippled through the room. Harold's smirk twitched. "Overrides? That sounds like a lawyer's trick." "It isn't," Linda replied. "It's law." She unfolded the paper completely. The ink had bled faintly into the fibers.
the mark of a letter written with intention, not haste. When she began reading, her voice carried differently, lower, more intimate. To my family gathered here, if these words are being read, then I am gone, and you have come, some to mourn, some to measure what remains. The cousins shifted uncomfortably. Harold sighed, impatient. You may believe this is merely about property or money, but you would be mistaken. I have left behind more than deeds or figures. I have left a choice, made long ago, unseen by most of you. Her words fell into the stillness like drops of rain. I watched Harold roll his eyes, but there was tightness in his jaw now, the first crack in his armor. Linda turned the page slightly, tracing the next line with her finger. To the one among you who bore judgment instead of praise, who gave labor instead of excuses, who stood steady when mockery was easier, I leave not a token, but the whole of what I own. The room froze. Harold's sister gasped. One cousin muttered, "What does that mean?" Harold barked a laugh that came out too loud. "Oh, come on. Bore judgment? Gave labor? She's talking about me. I managed the company for her these last years. Everyone knows that." Linda's eyes stayed on the page. "I'll continue," she said. He lifted a hand sharply. "No, not until we verify what you're reading. That clause sounds suspicious. Let's see that paper." Linda didn't move. "You will not touch this document, Mr. Grant." He stood now, towering over the table. "You're hiding something. I want to see the signature." "Sit down," she said firmly. "Your aunt signed this with 2 witnesses present. The document is certified and sealed. If you interrupt again, I'll have you removed from this room." For the first time that day, Harold hesitated. The arrogance faltered, replaced with a flicker of uncertainty. His voice softened, low and venomous. "You think you can threaten me in my own house?" "It isn't your house," Linda replied quietly. The words hit harder than any shout. Harold stared at her, nostrils flaring, then sank back into his chair. The cousins avoided his eyes. Linda took one more breath. The thunder outside rolled again, louder this time, echoing through the old walls. "Let this be my final truth," she read, "that wealth belongs not to those who demand it, but to those who earn it quietly. My decision is made. May it bring peace, or reveal truth if peace cannot live here." She looked up, but didn't speak further. The silence in that room was almost holy. Then Harold slammed his fist against the armrest. "You're not finishing this charade. I'll have this thrown out." But Linda's hand moved to the edge of the table, resting on an embossed folder sealed with gold. "This," she said evenly, "isn't over yet. There's one final sentence." The storm roared outside. Harold's knuckles went white, and I realized he already knew he wasn't going to like what came next. The room had gone so still that the ticking of the old grandfather clock sounded almost deafening. Rain streaked down the windows in long, trembling lines, and every few seconds, lightning lit up Eleanor's portrait above the fireplace. Her eyes, forever gentle in oil and brush, seemed to follow the moment unfolding. Linda stood tall behind the mahogany table. Her hand rested on the final page, her expression unreadable. The cousins looked around nervously, as if afraid to breathe. Harold's knee bounced under the table, the only sound in a room that suddenly felt too small for its secrets. "Read it," he said finally. The edge in his voice had dulled, replaced by something raw. Fear, maybe, though he'd never admit it. Linda's gaze softened, not toward him, but toward the paper. She drew in a quiet breath. "This," she said, is the final line written by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. The thunder outside seemed to pause, as if even the storm waited. Linda read slowly, every word deliberate. "The one who was despised shall inherit all." For a moment, no one reacted. The words hung in the air, echoing through the silence like a church bell in a canyon. Then came the confusion. A cousin blinked, whispering, "Despised?" Another muttered, "What does she mean, inherit all?" Harold laughed. It was a brittle, nervous sound. "Oh, that's rich. You expect me to believe that sentence changes anything? That's not legal language. It's poetry, sentimental nonsense." Linda didn't flinch. "It's an explicit bequest, Mr. Grant, written and signed by the testator. It overrides all previous divisions." His face flushed red. "You're lying." "I'm not." He slammed his palm on the table. "Then who? Who's this despised one?" No one answered, but I could feel the air in the room turning toward me. Slowly, their eyes shifted, one by one, until the last of them fell on me in the corner. Linda didn't look away. Her eyes met mine, calm and steady, as if confirming something she had known all along. Harold stared between us. His voice cracked. No, absolutely not. You think Aunt Eleanor would give everything to—" He couldn't even say it. The word hung unsaid, ugly and heavy. I stood slowly. My chair scraped softly against the floor. "To the help," I said. My voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Is that the word you're looking for?" No one spoke. Even Harold's sister had lowered her head. Linda folded the paper carefully, placing it back into its envelope. "Mrs. Whitmore was very clear," she said. "The estate, properties, financial accounts, and holdings are to be transferred entirely to Mr. Samuel Grant, effective immediately." The storm thundered as if punctuating her words. Harold's laughter returned, louder now, wild and desperate. "You can't be serious. This is insane. I'll drag this through court for years." Linda's tone remained level. "You're welcome to try. But I should mention—" She reached into the folder and lifted a second sheet of paper bearing a crimson seal. This clause was reviewed and notarized by the state of Georgia before Mrs. Whitmore's passing. I was one of the witnesses. Harold froze. The color drained from his face, replaced by something hollow. The cousins began whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the sound. It was the sound of people recalculating their loyalties. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from pride, but from disbelief. For years, I'd come to this house to clean gutters, paint railings, repair leaks. I'd walk these halls knowing my presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And now, somehow, every inch of it, the creaking floors, the roses in the garden, the portrait above the mantel, was mine. I didn't smile yet. I didn't move. Linda's eyes lingered on me a moment longer, then she closed the folder. Mrs. Whitmore asked that her final message be read aloud only after the estate is settled. She wanted peace, not spectacle. Harold stood again, trembling this time. "You think this is over?" Linda met his glare with calm certainty. "No, Mr. Grant, I think it's finally beginning." And in that instant, as thunder rolled once more, I knew she was right. The inheritance wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of truth finding its voice. Harold's face had gone pale, the kind of white that only anger or fear can bring. His breath came sharp and uneven, fogging the air before him. The rain outside pounded harder, beating against the windows as if echoing his fury. "This is a fraud!" he shouted. "It's a trick, some twisted stunt you've all planned." Linda didn't flinch. She stood calmly, hands folded over the sealed document, her poise unbroken. "Everything you've heard," she said evenly, "has been certified by the state of Georgia, witnessed, signed, and sealed." He laughed, a hard, broken sound. "Witnessed by who? You? A paid mouthpiece? Her gaze didn't waver. By me, and by Judge Alan Sloan. The seal you see here, she turned the document toward the room, the crimson wax glinting under the chandelier, was pressed with his hand. The room stirred. Someone gasped softly. Harold's sister whispered his name, but he didn't seem to hear her. His hands were shaking as he jabbed a finger toward Linda. That seal means nothing. You think a judge would stand by something this outrageous? I do, Linda said. Because he already has. The sentence landed like a gavel. For a long moment, no one moved. The rain softened, then faded into a hollow dripping sound from the gutters. Even the thunder seemed to pull back, leaving only silence. Harold's voice lowered, but the venom remained. You don't understand what you're doing, he hissed. That money built this family's name. You hand it to him, he gestured toward me, and you bury us. You destroy everything we are. I finally spoke. My words were quiet, steady. Maybe it's time something new grew from what you buried. He turned on me, eyes blazing. Don't talk to me like you belong here. I worked here my whole life, I said. I think that counts for something. For a split second, something human flickered in his eyes. Shame, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He scoffed and looked away. Linda resumed, her voice as clear as the sound of rain easing outside. Mrs. Whitmore anticipated this reaction, Mr. Grant. In fact, she left a written statement addressing it directly. She opened a second envelope and read aloud. To those who would contest my decision, know this. I leave my estate not to preserve a name, but to honor a soul. The world is built by those who serve it quietly. If that truth offends you, let it test your character one last time. The words filled the room like a hymn. Harold sank back into his chair. He stared at the table, jaw tight, the muscles in his face twitching. For the first time, he looked small. His sister reached for his arm, whispering, Harold, let it go. He pulled away. I'll take it to court. I'll drag them all through it. Linda folded the paper neatly and placed it inside her folder. Then you'll only prove her right. That silenced him, completely. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Outside, the wind was settling, the storm breaking apart over the garden Eleanor had loved. I watched as Harold's reflection flickered in the window, angry, defeated, yet hollow. And somewhere deep down, I felt a pang of something unexpected, not triumph, but sorrow. For all his cruelty, Harold had been raised on the idea that money was love and love was ownership. He'd never learned what Eleanor tried to teach us all, that giving freely was the only way to ever own peace. Linda gathered the documents, closing the leather folder with a quiet click. "There's nothing left to discuss," she said. But Harold didn't stand. His eyes were still fixed on me, cold and burning. "You think this ends with a letter and a seal?" I met his stare. "No," I said softly. "It ends when you stop pretending she knew exactly what she was doing." He didn't answer. The fire popped once more, sending a spark upward. Outside, the first break of sunlight cut through the clouds. And in that fragile light, the truth finally felt real. The storm had passed, leaving behind that strange stillness that comes after heavy rain, the kind that feels both cleansing and uneasy. A shaft of pale light slipped through the tall windows, cutting across the parlor and glinting off the mahogany table. Dust motes floated in it, shimmering like the ghosts of everything that had just been said. No one moved. The cousins sat stiff in their chairs, staring at the documents as though the words written on them might rearrange themselves if they waited long enough. Linda stood near the fireplace, the sealed folder tucked under her arm, silent but resolute. Harold hadn't spoken again. He leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, his hand over his mouth, eyes distant and glassy. The rage had drained out of him, replaced by something quieter, disbelief, maybe even humiliation. I stayed where I'd been the whole time, near the corner of the room, half in shadow. It didn't feel real. The idea that this house, her house, was now mine sat heavy on my chest. The smell of lilacs still lingered faintly in the air, just like it had the last time Eleanor had sat beside me on the porch, telling me stories about her youth in Charleston. She'd smiled at me then, her hands folded in her lap. "You remind me of my brother," she'd said, "humble to a fault. I hope one day the world sees you the way I do." Now it had, though not in the way I'd ever imagined. Linda broke the silence first. "The documents will be processed this week," she said, her voice steady but kind. "The property transfers, financial accounts, and holdings will all be placed in your name, Mr. Grant." All heads turned toward me. Hearing my name spoken like that, formally, with respect, felt strange. For so many years it had been said with orders attached. "Samuel, fetch the ladder. Samuel, clean the gutters. Samuel, mind the silver." Now it carried weight. I rose slowly, unsure whether to speak. My throat felt tight, but I managed. I don't know what to say," I admitted. "She never told me about any of this." Linda gave a small smile. "She wanted it that way. Mrs. Whitmore believes generosity means more when it's not expected." A few of the cousins looked away, their guilt hanging visible in the air. Harold didn't move. I looked around the room at the family portraits on the wall, the faded rug Eleanor loved, the piano she used to play on Sunday afternoons when the windows were open and the neighbors could hear. Every piece of it carried her quiet grace. "I don't want to take anything from anyone," I said softly. "I only want to honor her." Harold scoffed. "You think you can honor her by stealing what's ours?" Linda turned her gaze on him. "You lost nothing, Mr. Grant. You just never earned what you expected to be given." He glared at her but said nothing. I could have argued back, but I didn't. Instead, I thought of Eleanor's letter again, the one that had brought me here. "Sit quietly, Samuel. Let them show who they are." She'd known this moment would come. She'd known that silence could say more than any speech. So I said nothing. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the magnolia trees in gold. Light poured into the parlor, catching Harold's reflection in the window beside mine. He looked older now, smaller somehow. Linda turned toward me once more. "There's one last thing," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore requested a private note be given to you after the reading." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small envelope, its paper yellowed and soft, my name written in Eleanor's delicate handwriting. The sight of it made my chest ache. I took it carefully, almost afraid to touch it. "Thank you," I whispered. As the others began to rise, some silent, some murmuring excuses to leave, I stayed still, the letter trembling between my fingers. Because I already knew, whatever was inside wasn't about wealth or property. It was about love. The kind that had always lived quietly, just beneath the noise. The room had emptied, leaving behind only the faint echo of voices that had filled it an hour ago. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly beneath a thin veil of ash. I stood by the window, the letter still unopened in my hand. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, and the magnolia leaves glistened with tiny drops of gold from the late afternoon sun. For a long while, I didn't move. I just stared at the envelope, tracing my name with my thumb. Samuel Grant. Her handwriting was as gentle as her voice. Even now it seemed alive, as if she had written it yesterday, smiling softly to herself. When I finally opened it, the paper gave a quiet sigh, like it had been waiting. The ink had faded a little, but her words were still clear. "My dear Samuel," it began, "if you are reading this, then my faith in you has already been justified. I imagine you're standing where I once stood, in that old parlor, surrounded by eyes that never truly saw you. But I did. I always did." My throat tightened. I sat down in the same chair I'd taken at the start of the reading, where I had once felt small. Now it felt different, not mine by ownership, but by belonging. "You were never the help, Samuel. You were the heart. Every garden you tended, every repair you made, you did with care. You brought dignity to labor and kindness to a house that had long forgotten either." The words blurred for a moment as I blinked back tears. I could almost hear her voice again, slow and steady, the way she used to speak when we walked through the orchard. "I know you never asked for recognition, which is why you deserve it most. When you left for college, you thought it was a scholarship from the community fund. It wasn't. It was me. I wanted you to have the education your father never had. You were the only one who worked for it, the only one who thanked me not with words, but how you lived." A deep breath left me. The world outside felt impossibly quiet, as if Savannah itself had stopped to listen. "I've seen what greed does to people, Samuel. It makes them blind to the beauty of what they already have. You were never blind. You saw worth in small things, in people, in days, in duty. So I leave you what they called wealth, hoping you'll turn it into something richer still." I folded the letter halfway, resting it in my lap. Through the window, a soft wind stirred the garden. The roses she planted years ago swayed gently, still standing after every storm. "Use this gift to build peace, not pride. Let this house be a place where kindness lives again. That is how you will honor me." At the bottom, her familiar signature curved with grace, "Eleanor Whitmore," and below it, one final line written smaller, almost like a whisper. "When they laugh, Samuel, smile. It means you've already won." I sat there for a long time, watching the light fade. The clock ticked softly in the background, steady and patient, the same way she had lived her life. When I finally rose, I placed the letter back in its envelope and walked toward the doorway. The wooden floors creaked beneath my steps, old but sturdy. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and renewal. I stopped once more before leaving and looked back at the portrait above the mantel. Her painted eyes caught the last bit of sunlight, and for a fleeting second, I could almost swear she smiled. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me." Then I stepped out into the golden evening, the house behind me no longer heavy with ghosts, but filled with peace. And as the wind brushed against the magnolias, I realized she hadn't left me anything to own. She had left me everything to become.